I didn't think I'd ever leave like that. Not in the middle of her kitchen, with the smell of coffee barely fading from the mugs I'd set on the counter. But something had snapped, something sharp and unnameable. I walked out. The door clicked behind me, and I expected, well, I don't know what I expected. For her to chase me? For anyone to stop me? But there was nothing. Just the hollow sound of my boots against the hallway tiles, echoing off the walls, and the faint memory of her eyes, steady, almost unreadable, watching me go. Her name is Eleanor. I've known her for a few months now, though it feels longer, like time bends around her presence. She's confident in ways I'm not sure I even understand, the kind of confidence that doesn't need to be loud or flashy. Mid-40s, tall enough that I sometimes have to tilt my head when she leans in close, with hair the color of ash that somehow softens the angles of her face. And she smells faintly of sandalwood, always lingering just behind the edges of her words. I was supposed to be fixing the copier in the little repair shop she manages. She had promised to make it quick, 5 minutes tops, she said, tapping a pen against the counter. I believed her, mostly because when Eleanor says something, the air around her seems to bend to it. And yet, here I was, heart still hammering from something she hadn't even said. There was a pause earlier, a silence neither of us could, or wanted, to fill. She'd handed me a mug of coffee, her fingers brushing mine just slightly, too brief to be accidental, and I almost dropped it. That fleeting contact had sent some kind of current through me, a static tension that lingered even now as I walked alone down the street. She noticed it too, I think, though she didn't react. She never does. That's part of the electricity. The way she watches without looking like she's watching. The way she notices the smallest thing and then does nothing, letting it hover. When I think about that moment, it's not her eyes, exactly. It's the way she stood there, leaning just slightly on the counter, the mug half full in her hand, and the faint crease at the corner of her mouth that suggested she knew exactly what she'd done. She could have laughed, said something teasing, broken the tension, but she didn't. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between us. A question, a challenge, a pull I didn't know how to name. I keep replaying it in my head, over and over. The sound of the door closing behind me, the quick warmth of the coffee on my palms, the almost imperceptible shift in her posture as she leaned against the counter. That brief connection, it shouldn't have meant anything, and yet I can't stop thinking about it. I don't know if she knows the effect she has, or if she even cares. Maybe that's part of the allure. Maybe that's why I keep circling back to her in my head, even as I walk streets I don't even know the names of. And somehow, in the quiet between the echo of my boots and the distant hum of traffic, I feel it. That small, impossible spark. Something unspoken, fragile, and maybe dangerous. And I can't stop wondering if she felt it too. I found myself back at the repair shop a few days later, not because I had to, but because something in me wouldn't let the space between us stay silent for too long. Eleanor was at her desk, sorting invoices with her usual precision, the kind that makes everything else seem sloppy by comparison. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pale glow across the room, but she didn't notice, or pretended not to. "I thought you said the copier would take 5 minutes," I said, trying to make my voice casual. My hands fiddled with a screwdriver, though the machine wasn't broken, at least, not seriously. She didn't look up. "Things take longer than we expect," she said, flat, almost clipped. There was no irritation in her tone, but I sensed the edge of something unsaid, the quiet weight of her own fatigue pressing through the words. I crouched beside the copier, pretending to check the rollers, but my eyes kept flicking to her hands as they moved across the paperwork. They were strong, elegant, a little worn at the knuckles, the kind of hands that had built, repaired, and organized more than I could imagine. I noticed the faint tremor when she reached for a stack of envelopes, the subtle way her shoulders slumped just slightly when she realized she'd forgotten something. "You've been doing this long?" I asked, leaning closer, careful not to breach the space she seemed to guard so fiercely. Her laugh came then, low and quiet, almost apologetic. "Long enough to know when someone's staring," she said, without looking at me. There was a hint of a smile at the corner of her lips, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I caught a flash of vulnerability there, a tiredness, a shadow of regret, maybe even loneliness. And I wanted to reach out, to say something that might ease it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I adjusted the copier, my fingers brushing a corner that didn't need touching. She flinched slightly, and I felt a jolt, as if the air itself had shivered. She looked up then, briefly, and for a moment, her gaze held mine, sharp and assessing, and then she looked away again. Almost done, I murmured, more to myself than to her. She hummed, a soft sound, not really an answer, and I noticed the faint tension along her jaw, the way she held herself upright as if the world required her to. It was an unspoken armor, and I realized I'd never seen her let it slip before. Not like this, not even a little. I wanted to ask what made her so guarded, but I didn't. Instead, I lingered near her desk, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, but not close enough to cross a line. And then she laughed again, softly, almost whispering, at something I hadn't even heard her say to herself. And for a heartbeat, the tension between us seemed to bend, just slightly, and I imagined what it would be like if she let someone in, just a little. When I finally stepped back, adjusting my posture as if leaving was casual, I caught her looking at me again, though she quickly turned away. Her eyes lingered on me, and I swore I saw the smallest flicker of something. Curiosity, hesitation, maybe recognition. And then she smiled, just a little, and in that moment, something tightened in my chest. A gentle pull, subtle but impossible to ignore, tugging me closer even as I reminded myself to step away. I left the shop that day, feeling the weight of her glance behind me, and the echo of that quiet laugh followed me like a whisper I couldn't shake. The rain started just as I was locking up the shop, the first fat drops splattering against the windows like impatient fingers. Eleanor was still inside, filing papers, her desk lamp cutting a warm cone of light through the dim room. I hesitated in the doorway, listening to the rhythmic tap of water against the roof. I shouldn't have stayed. I shouldn't have let myself linger. But the air between us, thick, charged, unfinished, kept me there. "Do you want to wait it out?" I asked, my voice lower than I meant it to be. I didn't really expect her to say yes. She looked up, startled, then shook her head slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I have work to finish," she said, but the corner of her mouth quirked as if she knew I was hoping for something else entirely. I moved closer to the desk, pretending to check the inventory list, though I couldn't stop noticing her hands again, the way they paused over the papers, the slight tremor in her fingers when she picked up a pen. She seemed smaller somehow, softened by the dim light, by the rain, by the quiet that enveloped us. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to be so guarded, that I wasn't going anywhere, but the words stuck somewhere in my throat. A phone buzzed on her desk, and her hand shot out before I could stop her. She glanced at the screen and froze for a second, an ex's name flashing. Her jaw tightened, and I felt the sharp pull of something I couldn't name. Hurt? Embarrassment? Or the reminder that there were other lives she carried with her, outside this small room and this storm? I looked down at the papers I was holding, pretending to be absorbed, but I couldn't stop my ears from catching the low hitch in her breath, the small exhale that betrayed tension. I wanted to reach out, to brush her hair back, to say something that might untangle the sudden strain, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer, just enough that our knees nearly brushed as I crouched to pick up a fallen pen. She didn't flinch away, though she didn't move closer either. The space between us was heavy, a magnetic force I couldn't control. Did you ever regret anything?" I asked, suddenly daring to risk a little. The words felt clumsy, raw, too much. She looked up at me, eyes wide for a fraction of a second, before she looked down at her desk, tracing a circle on the papers with the pen. She began, then paused, the sentence breaking off like a fragile thread. She didn't finish, and in the silence, the question hung between us, unspoken, unclaimed. The storm outside rattled the windows, and I could see the reflection of my own hesitation in the glass. I wanted to lean closer, just enough to feel her presence fully, maybe brush my hand against hers, maybe anything. But the sound of the phone buzzing again yanked her attention back, and I stepped away, heart hammering in protest. She answered it, her voice soft, polite, distant. I turned toward the door, pretending to be ready to leave, though every step away felt like pulling myself from quicksand. And yet, even as I opened the door, the memory of that pause, the suspended glance, the almost confession, the nearness of her body, stayed with me. A heartbeat longer, a breath too close. I left the shop in the rain, soaked to the bone, but it didn't matter. Because that single, unspoken moment, the almost touch, the unfinished sentence, had rooted itself in me. I found her in the back office, standing by the small window that overlooked the alley behind the shop. The light was fading, muted and gray, and it caught her profile in a way that made her look both distant and impossibly present at the same time. I wanted to speak, to break the quiet, but every word seemed heavier than the last, like they would crush whatever fragile balance existed between us. She didn't turn when I entered. She just exhaled slowly, hands pressed to the glass, fingertips tracing invisible lines. "We can't keep doing this," she said finally, her voice low, almost a whisper. I froze, unsure whether to step closer or run away. "Doing what?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. The tension, the lingering glances, the unspoken weight of everything we weren't saying. It had been growing between us like a storm cloud. She turned then, slowly, and for a moment, I caught her eyes, gray, sharp, and tired all at once. "I don't know this," she admitted. The waiting, the staring, pretending nothing's happening. I can't do it anymore." I swallowed, my chest tight, and for once, I let myself notice everything. The way her shoulders slumped, the faint tremble in her hands, the shadow under her eyes that spoke of long nights, of thinking too much, of carrying more than I could ever see. I wanted to reach for her, to say it's okay, but the words would have felt small, meaningless. "I don't even know what you want from me," I said, voice shaking more than I intended. The admission tasted bitter, like confessing a sin. Her lips parted, but she didn't answer right away. She just stepped closer, and the air between us thickened with all the things we weren't saying. The silence became unbearable, a living thing, stretching and bending, pressing down on us. I could feel it in the slight dip of her chin, the restless tapping of her foot against the floor, the way her eyes flickered away from mine and then back again. Maybe we're both pretending," she said at last, her voice cracking just slightly. "Pretending this is normal, pretending we can act like nothing matters, when it does." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I understood. My hands itched to touch her, to close the space that had become unbearably close, but I didn't, because touching her would have been too much, too real, too everything. We just stood there, the rain starting again against the window pane, and I realized how impossible it was to ignore the pull between us, the weight of every glance, every shared moment. And yet, nothing had been named, nothing had been claimed. She finally broke the silence with a sigh, soft and heavy. "I don't know if I can keep pretending I'm fine," she whispered, almost to herself. "I don't even know if I want to be." And in that quiet, in that pause where everything else seemed to fall away, I realized this wasn't just about me, or her, or the rain, or the copier, or the hours we spent pretending. It was about the unbearable truth we hadn't admitted, that we were both dangerously close to needing something we weren't ready to name. And then she turned her back to me, shoulders tense, hands pressed to the glass again, and whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I don't even know who I am anymore, not with you here." I found her at the small table by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold hours ago. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside slick and gray, and the pale afternoon light made her look smaller than usual, like the weight she carried was pressing her into the chair. "You always look like you're holding something back," I said quietly, not sure why I said it, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she set the mug down and reached for an envelope, worn at the edges, yellowed like it had been touched too many times. "I wasn't going to show you this," she said, her voice low, hesitant. "It's old. From someone I lost a long time ago. I froze, caught mid-step as she carefully pulled out the letter, her fingers tracing the faded ink. You lost someone? My voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. She nodded, eyes on the page, lips pressed together. He was important. More than I realized at the time. I thought I'd moved on, thought I was okay. But sometimes you don't know how deep it cuts until someone else reminds you. I leaned against the counter, careful not to crowd her, and watched her. I noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders sagged just a fraction, and the faint catch in her breath when she read a certain line aloud. The room felt heavy, thick with her past, and I felt a strange tightness in my chest, like I was both intruding and being trusted at once. Do you still think about him? I asked, my words hesitant, careful. I didn't know why I needed to ask, but the ache in her eyes made me do it. She glanced up at me then, her gaze sharp but soft, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the air between us had stopped moving. Every day, she admitted. But it's not the same. It's quieter now. Or maybe I've just learned to carry it differently. There was silence after that, heavy and strange, and I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the distance, but I didn't. Instead, I noticed the tiny details, the way her ring caught the light, the faint crease between her eyebrows, the almost imperceptible way she bit her lip as she read another line. Each small motion seemed to echo in my chest. Then she handed me the envelope. I thought you should see it, she said softly. Not because it matters to you, but because maybe it'll explain some of the things I do, the things I hold back. I took it, feeling the weight of history and heartbreak pressing into my hands. The paper smelled faintly of old ink and rain, and for some reason, I imagined her younger self, hopeful, reckless, unguarded, pouring everything into these words. And somehow, seeing it, holding it, I felt an intimacy that was terrifying in its quiet intensity. I didn't know what to say. Nothing I could say would make this simpler, easier, or safer. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of how layered she was, the grief, the strength, the hidden fractures beneath her confidence. She watched me carefully, as if measuring my reaction, and then whispered, almost inaudibly, I didn't think anyone would ever understand. And in that tiny confession, in the way her eyes glistened with unshed tears, something seismic shifted in the room. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough that I knew I'd never see her the same way again. I found her in the shop late that evening, the lights dimmed to a soft amber that made every shadow stretch long and slow. She was seated at the desk, the same letter from the past still open in front of her, but now her hands weren't trembling. Instead, they rested lightly on the edges of the envelope, like she'd finally put something down she'd been carrying too long. I didn't speak at first. I didn't need to. The air between us was already heavy with the things we had both been holding back. The stolen glances, the almost confessions, the quiet ache of being near someone who mattered too much. She looked up at me then, her eyes soft, tired, and strangely resolute. I think I understand now, she said quietly. About us. Or what this is. I swallowed and nodded, though my throat felt tight. I think I do too, I admitted, the words hesitant but honest. The truth didn't need loud proclamations. It was in the small movements, the way she tilted her head slightly, how her shoulders relaxed just enough for me to notice. We didn't sit together at first, just shared the same quiet space. The sound of the rain tapping against the window outside filled the silence, gentle and steady. It was enough, more than enough, to feel the presence of someone who understood the complicated weight of your own heart. I moved closer slowly, careful not to rush anything, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she shifted slightly, creating a small gap I could close without overstepping. And then, without a word, our hands brushed, just fingertips at first, tentative, testing the waters of something inevitable. She let her hand linger, and I let mine follow, until it felt natural, not forced. No words were needed. We didn't need to define it, to label it, to make it perfect. Just the contact, the warmth, the quiet acknowledgement that we had both been circling this for months and finally, somehow, found the courage to exist together in the same small space. She leaned her forehead against my shoulder then, a brief, soft pressure that spoke volumes. I felt the subtle rise and fall of her breath, the faint tremor of her fingers still brushing mine, and for the first time, I let myself believe that the tension, the longing, the quiet obsession had been worth it, that it had led to this. Unspoken, patient, fragile, but real. We sat like that for a long time, letting the silence settle around us like a blanket. No confessions of love, no promises that couldn't be kept, just two people finally acknowledging what had always been there between them. The letter lay forgotten on the desk, the rain outside slowing to a soft drizzle, and still we didn't move. Not because we were stuck, but because we didn't need to. The understanding had been said without words, earned in the space we had given each other. And when I finally exhaled, it wasn't relief, it was quiet finality. We didn't need more. Looking back now, months later, I can still remember the quiet weight of that evening. The shop was empty, the rain had long stopped, and yet the air between us had carried a tension I didn't understand at the time. Something fragile, something real, that didn't need words to exist. I've thought a lot about Eleanor since then, about how she carried her past with such quiet dignity, about how her strength always hid a tender vulnerability that only a few could ever notice. And I've thought about myself, too, how I was pulled toward her, almost against my own better judgment, how I learned that patience, restraint, and simple presence could mean more than words, more than impulsive declarations or grand gestures. She changed too, in small, imperceptible ways. I saw her relax, just a little, in moments when she didn't feel the need to armor herself against the world. The way she allowed someone else into the corners of her life, tentatively, carefully, but undeniably, taught me something I didn't expect, that love doesn't have to announce itself with fireworks or certainty. Sometimes it's just a quiet acknowledgement, a touch held a moment longer, a glance that lingers when no one is looking. I don't think either of us knew what we were doing at first. The pull between us was messy, imperfect, and often confusing. But that's what made it real. We weren't characters in a storybook. We were two people navigating everything we didn't know, everything we were scared to admit, and somehow, in the middle of all that uncertainty, we found a rhythm, a shared understanding that didn't need to be spoken out loud. Even now, I catch myself remembering the little things, the way her fingers brushed mine over a desk, the tilt of her head as she leaned against my shoulder, the quiet strength she carried into every room. Those moments weren't dramatic, but they were seismic to me. They reshaped the way I thought about connection, patience, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be rushed. We never needed declarations. We never needed fireworks. We just needed to be present with each other, and that was enough. It taught me that sometimes love is quieter than you expect, subtler than you imagine, but no less real. And so I carry that with me. The weight of what we shared lingers, not as a burden, but as a reminder that real intimacy, real human connection, is earned, fragile, and entirely worth it. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?